Thanks, Marty.
Greg Braun, also Philo.
Oh, good, great.
Yes, Greg Braun, the Executive Director of the Guardians of Martin County. And so I first want to thank you for coming and holding this workshop here in Martin County. You sort of invited yourself into the lion's den because indeed we're the epicenter for water quality problems in the southern part of the state. So I want to acknowledge that you have done that, whether it was intentional or not, I don't know. But what you're going to hear, I hope, from many of the other speakers is the continuing frustration that we've got with water quality related problems in our area. So I am here representing the Guardians of Martin County. We're a nonprofit environmental advocacy group. We've got over 1,200 donors, primarily in Martin County, the Treasure Coast area. Water quality is a key issue for the Guardians, and so I guess if job security is good, I've got it now because you guys, the results of the state's water quality standards are presenting just almost insurmountable problems here in our area. I'm also a professional ecologist. That's what I do for my living, and I will say that I'm not a water quality expert by any means. I do mangroves, I do seagrasses, I was the principal author for the Manatee Protection Plan for Martin County and St. Lucie County. So I see the effects of the results of your standards on the environment. And I'd like to recommend that you keep that in mind in everything that you do. Because whether it is the turbidity standards or nutrient standards, the bottom line for all of us is the effects of what you're doing is coming down to us here in the local area. And whether it's decreasing seagrasses, whether it's deaths of manatees or sea turtles, dying oysters, what's coming to us is the effects of your water quality policies. So although I don't have specific comments where you know it changed in section such and such, my overall statement to you is that the existing policies and standards and permitting processes are not working. Absolutely not. Now, I've been in this area for over 40 years and involved with this, and my observations are that the ecology is continuing to decline. We first started having banning of shellfish harvesting back in the 1970s and 80s. Well, you know, I thought that was bad. You couldn't eat the shellfish. Well, things have continued to decline. You know, you can't eat the fish now. And while I acknowledge that you need some sort of a standard on that, I don't feel that we have the time for you to wait on the UF study, then consider taking this up in the next triennial review. I think you ought to have some sort of a schedule in this set of changes such that it is on your radar screen and we can see measurable progress towards that goal within the next several years. Aside from the UF studies, there have been other studies done by reputable organizations that show that we have contaminated fish that are being consumed by local subsistence fishermen. And both the meat of the fillets of those fish and the livers of those fish have toxic levels of microcystin and other cyanobacteria. That's a reality, and I want you to take that into consideration as you move forward with this rulemaking process. What I have seen are decreases in water quality across the board, whether it's a Class 1 water or Class 2 water, Class 3 waters, the Indian River Aquatic Reserve, our outstanding Florida waters, the effects of whether it is the standard itself or a non-enforcement of the standard, we are seeing those adverse effects in these water bodies that have been set aside supposedly for those better purposes of recreation and fish consumption and that sort of thing. The public wants changes that result in better water quality. So whether you change this regulation or that regulation, or that section of it, the effective goal of what we want is improved water quality. I thought when I bought waterfront property here in Martin County on the Indian River Lagoon back in the 1980s, I thought this is a great investment. I'm not making any more waterfront property. But in actuality, the lack of the state in taking the bull by the horns and regulating water quality effectively has led to that being an unacceptable decision on my part to buy waterfront property. If you can't stand on your deck and breathe the air because of the aerosolized cyanobacteria, that is a poor statement on how the state has not taken the bull by the horns and effectively protected the health of our residents. I'm glad that you mentioned that your economic evaluation will include the cost to not be proactive in this, or not even reactive. I think by the reduction in real estate values and the increasing costs of human health, very definitely your analysis here needs to include what are the economic costs if you don't move forward in strengthening the regulations. I will agree with many of the things that Marty said, and one of those is the issue of the protection for the worm reefs. I was involved in that coral reef DEP study back of a couple of years ago, and yes, for the purposes of coral, we needed to end the northerly boundary of that coral reef tract at the St. Lucie Inlet. But that doesn't mean that the worm rock that is north of St. Lucie Inlet and the hard bottom to the north of that shouldn't be protected from the adverse effects of sedimentation and the fallout of suspended materials. So I'm going to suggest that you not limited to the boundary of that coral reef area, but extend it northerly in all the areas where there are nearshore benthic resources that could be affected by sedimentation and fallout of suspended materials.
Do you know of any resources for defining that boundary that would be useful?
Yep, okay, we can work with Florida Oceanographic Society to provide that to you, very definitely. I'm sure your coastal resources folks have that because of the way they regulate beach nourishment projects and the nearshore hard bottom further, at least as far as St. Lucie County, and maybe further than that. And finally, Dave, well, I appreciate your statement about if it looks bad, stay out of the water. Unfortunately, I don't feel that that is an adequate response to protect the human health of the residents and visitors to the state of Florida. Whether it is DEP or the Department of Health and or EPA, we should be looking at all of you to protect our human health, and unfortunately we're not seeing a leadership role in that. Instead, we're seeing rule changes that ultimately the effect of it is to reduce water quality standards, and that is no longer acceptable. Thank you.
Drew Martin, I'm with the Sierra Club here in Martin, St. Lucie, and Palm Beach County, and I have a number of comments. First, I just wanted to say that the Sierra Club did sue the state of Florida with some other environmental groups to get numeric standards rather than narrative standards. And we believe and have believed that a numeric standard is much more enforceable than a narrative standard. So we recommend that the DEP always use numeric standards and avoid use of narrative standards. There was a settlement between the EPA and Florida DEP. And, I don't know if that brought all about numeric standards, but I hope that you will focus on that. We believe that sedimentation is a significant problem and is not being monitored enough. There needs to be more focus on capture and monitoring of sedimentation. It takes too long in the state of Florida to create an impaired water body, and this is one of the problems, and it's the real real fault is not so much with your group, but with enforcement. There's just not enough enforcement in DEP, and that is because the legislature has not provided enough funding for enforcement. We really need to remove septic tanks and outfalls from barrier islands. I'm shocked in Palm Beach County, there's a development called Briny Breezes, and they just allowed a dredge and fill permit, which is they took the lowest land. This is right within, you're right at the ocean. And Briny Breezes is all septics. They build on the lowest land. Now every time it rains, it floods the septics. What's happening? When septics get underwater, then they don't work any longer. All that septic is getting right into the ocean. And the intercoastal, what's the worst thing is that barrier islands feed both the ocean and the lagoons. So it's a double-edged sword. So we really need to focus on barrier islands. Seagrass needs to be part of water quality monitoring. We're having tremendous loss of seagrass. Just here in North Palm Beach County, they were monitoring at MacArthur Park. They had something like 8 or 9 or 10 different seagrasses. They're now down to one single seagrass. We put seagrasses right off Lake Worth. The seagrasses are really dying, and that is a clear indicator of water quality problems. In addition, seagrasses are reducing your sediment load and your nutrient load. So when you lose your seagrasses, you're losing your water quality. So that's part of monitoring. So we want to see seagrass as part of your monitoring process. There needs to be a chemical analysis of sediments so that we're seeing sediments. We know there's a sediment trap in the C51, but we need an analysis. It was determined that most of those sediments were coming from sod farming in the EAA. My recommendation is that we need to go back and reduce the amount of sod farming, and we need to reduce the amount of lawns. We need to focus more on the minimum flows and levels for the environment in areas like the Waxahachie Wild and Scenic River. We need to focus on eliminating all outfalls from the barrier islands. There are unmonitored outfalls. We had an event. We had a kayakathon, and as we went by the golf courses, they were dumping untreated water from the golf courses right out of big pipes, and they would just flush their ponds, and it was going directly untreated. There really shouldn't be any untreated outflows. I work in a condominium. There's a drain at the bottom of the floor. I believe that drain is sending untreated water right directly into the lagoon, the Lake Worth Lagoon. That should not be allowed. People go in there, they wash their paintbrushes, they're washing all their chemicals, and that's all washing out. So we need to do away with these untreated outfalls, that real problem. We need to have monitoring of glyphosate and pesticides in the water quality monitoring in all the areas. We really need to start educating landscaping people and the people that are doing landscaping in their yards. People use way too much glyphosate.
Oh, yes.
They're using on everything, and it's sold on the TV. One of the things that we're seeing with the crisis with pollinators is that lawns are dead. They're dead. They're of no use, but we have a psychological attachment to them. We need to start educating the public. The best thing you can do for water quality is don't have a lawn. If you're going to have a lawn, let it be clover. Let it be all these natural native plants. We don't need everything to look like and I'm not denigrating Scott's, but let's face it, Scott's Miracle-Gro, putting that on your lawn during the rainy season, bad news for water quality. So we need more monitoring of canals and water quality in canals. We often ignore the water quality in canals. You are testing the lagoons. You're testing the estuaries. But is somebody testing the canals? Is somebody going there? Because some of those canals, we need enforcement in the canal system, because once the water gets in that canal, you have a huge rain event. That includes things like horse manure and all that.
it's too late. It's gonna get out when you have a hurricane. So we need to be in there looking at the water quality in canals.